The following clip is from the North to South Show, live every Monday and Wednesday at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, where we talk SEC football everything. Now, we'd love to have you out for next show, but for now, hit that like button down below, hit that subscribe button, and enjoy this clip. Who has the better receiving room, the Alabama Crimson Tide or the Georgia Bulldogs? Obviously, the two front runners in the SEC to go on to Atlanta this season to face off for the SEC championship and then ultimately go on to a playoff spot, because Alabama and Georgia right now in their respective divisions are a step above from the rest of the competition. I think that is no secret to anyone that Alabama is going to be heavy favorites to win the West, and Georgia is going to be heavy favorites to win the East. And with both of these teams being so good, there is reasoning behind it. They both have good defenses, and they also have really good offenses. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is breaking down who I would take personally. Again, this is always my opinion. All these videos are just my opinion, but it's interesting to look at and hear other people's opinions. And I love hearing from you guys too. So at the end of this video, once I go through everything, please tell me down below whose receiving room you'd take. Would you take Alabama's or would you take Georgia's? Because I know Alabama fans are going to lean towards Alabama. Georgia fans are going to lean towards Georgia. But the fans in the middle, especially, I'd love to hear what you guys think. And when I say receivers, I mean pass catchers. So this isn't limited to wide receivers. I'm not only limiting this to wide receivers. I'm going wide receivers, tight ends. No running backs. Obviously, that would be big for Georgia because Georgia has some really good pass catchers out of the backfield. So does Alabama. But I look at some guys at Georgia. James Cook especially. He's a really good pass catcher out of the backfield. So not going to count running backs. We were just going wide receivers and tight ends. So let's start off by talking about Alabama and how I have these set up. I have my top 5 guys for pass catchers for both teams. And then I have a few honorable mentions. So first, before I start talking about the guys that are on this team this year, Alabama historically is the greatest, no questions asked, wide receiver of all time. Like, you look at the guys that they've just been able to produce over the last couple seasons. Obviously, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Jerry Jeudy, and Henry Ruggs all just went. But on top of that, Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, Amari Cooper. The list goes on and on and on for great pass catchers out of Alabama. So historically, this team will always have the best wide receiver room in the nation, not only in the SEC, in the nation. I do feel like Ohio State does have the best room this year, but that's just my opinion again. But Alabama is still very strong, and they're always going to be strong. So before I get into my top 5, I'm going to go through my honorable mentions. I got 3 of them. I got Javon Baker, I got Trayshawn Holden, and I got Cameron Latou, who Latou is a guy that I feel many people are really high on this season for him to go out and have a huge season at tight end. Obviously, he is going to be behind Billingsley, but lots of exciting things coming out and lots of good talk about Latou coming into this season. So excited to see what he's able to do. But let me go through my top 5 in no specific order. My first guy, John Mechie, obviously from Brampton, Ontario, where I'm from Ontario. So John Mechie is going to be my favorite guy from this whole list. John Mechie is one of my favorite players in all of college football, not just because he is Canadian like me, but he's a fun player to watch. You see him step up in the role of being that second receiver under Devontae Smith when obviously Jalen Waddle goes down. And I tell you, this kid can ball. Last season, he had 55 receptions, 916 yards for 6 touchdowns, and that was still being behind Devontae Smith and then Jalen Waddle for parts of the season, and then all the other talent that they have on Alabama. So he put up some serious numbers despite having some serious talent around him. Slade Bolden, I got next, 24 receptions, 270 yards for 1 touchdown. You got Jamison Williams, transfer from Ohio State, who I did say earlier, Ohio State, in my opinion, has the most talented wide receiving room in all of the country. I look at Chris Olave, obviously being their main guy. You look at Garrett Wilson. You look at Jackson Smith in Jigba. You look at Julian Fleming, guys like that. That wide receiver room is stacked. So Jamison Williams obviously transfers out of Ohio State. Last season for them, he had 9 receptions, 154 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I do expect him to have some bigger role here at Alabama. So excited to see how he does in SEC ball next season. Next up, I got Jaleel Billingsley, obviously a tight end. 18 receptions last season, 287 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then finishing up with Ajayi Hall, who is a freshman. So obviously he's in high school last year. Had no stats, but I tell you, just from watching that Alabama spring game, and he's the guy that I've been really high on with this Alabama team. I know all the hype was around there in spring ball, but I'm telling you, just the ability that Alabama constantly has to be able to produce these really good wide receivers, I feel like this kid is going to break out this season. So those are my top 5 guys for Alabama. Now going on to Georgia. Georgia, I only had 1 honorable mention, and I'm going with Dominic Blaylock there. I think he's still a really good guy, but I didn't put him in my top 5. My top 5, I got Kearis Jackson. Obviously, again, going to say George Pickens is not on here because he is injured, and I think this makes the discussion even more interesting just without him, because we're looking at the guys who we know for 100% are going to be, not 100% because obviously anything can happen, but if the season started right now, this is where we're thinking of who's going to be the main guys for Georgia. So I got Kearis Jackson, 36 receptions for 514 yards, 3 touchdowns last season. You got Demetrius Robertson, who only played 6 games last season. He had 12 receptions for 110 yards. Then you got Jermaine Burton, 27 receptions, 404 yards for 3 touchdowns. Darnell Washington, who was a huge 5-star athlete out of high school, who obviously was his freshman season last year. He went 7 receptions for 166 yards, but only played 5 games last season. And then we were finishing up with a big transfer in Eric Gilbert, who I apologize to Georgia fans because I was corrected multiple times, because technically, obviously, Eric Gilbert on LSU was a tight end, but many people believe that Gilbert is going to be moved to the X receiver spot. So you could say that's why I really wanted to do this as pass catchers, because I didn't really want to single in and be like, oh, wide receivers, oh, tight ends, because you could make an argument that Gilbert could be either one of those guys. You could make an argument for a bunch of these guys being either one of those slots. So I just wanted to go pass catchers. Eric Gilbert last season for LSU had 35 receptions, 368 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So where do I think? I take all of this information, I take all of these stats and all of that. Where does my mind go to? And I think, obviously, the spectacle of just looking at the stats, and if you have these guys on paper, obviously, Alabama is the juicy one, because you look at it and you see John Mechie out-receives every single person on this list. He, on paper, is the best wide receiver on this list, and I take him, or pass catcher on this list, and I'd say that's a true statement. I wouldn't just say that's on paper. This guy is the most proven out of all of these guys, and I think he's the overall best pass catcher that you have on this list. With that being said, though, I think the stats don't correlate the best for the UGA receivers with their talent. Like, I look especially at Darnell Washington. I know he only played 5 games, but let's remember, he's making a freshman to sophomore jump. Same thing with Eric Gilbert. Usually see guys make huge jumps, especially big 5-star athletes. You got the number 1 and number 2 tight end in their class on your receiving core for Georgia. So I think that the talent isn't displayed by the stats in this case for Georgia. Kearis Jackson, I think, is the best receiver on Georgia. Obviously, on paper, he's the best receiver on Georgia, but he had a good season last year. But you're also looking at Georgia stat-wise, which was a more run-dependent offense than what Alabama had last season. Obviously, Alabama and Mac Jones hit a lot of it throughout the air, and you look at the quarterback play that Georgia had at the beginning of the season last year. Obviously, Stetson Bennett, there was a lot of confusion until JT Daniels finally steps in, and Georgia's passing game starts to become more consistent. So that's another asterisk, or another variable that you have to look at going into this whole thing. I look at the rest of the guys at Alabama. Slade Bolden just seems to be Mr. Reliable. He's a guy that looks to be very, very consistent for Alabama, and he's a guy I love watch playing. Jameson Williams, I'm really excited to see what he's able to do, because obviously he didn't get the most opportunities at Ohio State. Jaleel Billingsley, again, I think he's a guy that last season, very underrated player for Alabama, a guy that didn't always get the limelight like your Devontae Smiths or your Jalen Waddles, but he caught the ball quite a bit, and I look at the national championship game, I'm pretty sure he made some big conversions for Alabama in that game, if I remember correctly. I know he definitely touched the ball a couple of times, but you started to see him a lot more towards the end of the season. And then Ajayi Hall, obviously, we haven't seen him in in-game stuff, but if you watch any of the spring game or you watch any of his high school highlights, you know this kid is going to be the next real deal. It's so hard for me to pick, because I like picking, because that's obviously what makes this video's intro interesting, is that you wouldn't tune in and click on this video if I was just going to say, oh yeah, they have both great rooms. They have both really deep rooms and tons of talent on that. You already know that. That's not why you're here. You came here to hear me say which wide receiver room, or which receiving room, I keep saying wide receiving, which receiving or pass catching room is better. And honestly, if I was in charge of a team and I had to pick between these guys, I take the Georgia Bulldogs. Wide receivers alone, I take Alabama in a heartbeat, I think. I still think Kearis Jackson, I still think Robertson, and I still think Burton are amazing wide receivers, but I think you got John Mechie as being the best guy out of there, and then you still got Slade Bolden, Ajayi Hall, and then you take Jameson Williams too. I look at Georgia, though, and the addition of the 2 tight ends, or tight end / wide receiver, whatever you want to call Eric Gilbert. We'll just call him an athlete. You add those two guys in there and the talent that they have, going from a freshman to sophomore season, coming in with more college experience, I think that that's going to make something really, really special in Georgia and just make the passing attack that much more, because I know the stats look a lot better for Alabama right now because, again, that was a lot more pass heavy of an offense. They had a much better quarterback last season than what Georgia did, but I'm by a slim margin, just because of Darnell Washington and Eric Gilbert adding on to this receiving corps as a whole, not just because of the wide receivers, I would go Georgia. But if we're talking just wide receivers, I'm probably taking Alabama in this scenario. I just think that you add Darnell Washington and you add Eric Gilbert on top of the wide receivers that you already have there, and you have something really, really special at Georgia. But these two receiving cores, 110% are going to be two of the best in the nation. Not just the SEC. You're looking at these guys having the best in the SEC in the nation. Obviously, Ohio State's going to be up there. You're probably going to have Clemson up there, but nothing bad to be said at all about the receiving corpses. But if I had to take one, I am taking Georgia's at this current moment and time.